postmodernism? No doubt, before a concept of the postmodernism there was another so-called the modernism. It came into existence to the modern period combined with industrialization, market-oriented capitalist economies, new social classes, democracy, and Enlightenment valuist reason and progress. This controversial philosophy, the philosophy of the Enlightenment, it is possible that the establishment of objective facts and universal values. Haywood, 2012. One of the most ambiguous terminology and exciting the period of postmodernism is the term postmodernism itself. Critics and scholars disagree about it, of postmodernism, due to the multiplicity of its concepts and its implications from critic to another. There are a lot of meanings that made the concept of postmodernism contradictory with each other and different and overlapping. newdictionary.com 2016. The term is a number of trends or movements in the arts and literature developing in the 1970s in reaction to or rejection of the dogma, principles, or practices of established modernism, especially a movement in architecture and the decorative arts running counter to the practice and influence of the international style and encouraging the use of elements from historical vernacular styles and often playful allusion, decoration, and complexity. Dick, 2016, and in Merriam-Webster is of, relating to, or being any of various movements in reaction to modernism that are typically characterized by a return to traditional materials and forms, as in architecture, or by ironic self-reference and absurdity. Absurdity, as in literature. Webb, 2016. Postmodernism has appeared in a complex political circumstances, after the end of World War II, especially in the context of the Cold War and the spread of nuclear weapons, and the declaration of the birth of human rights, and the emergence of theater of the absurd, and the emergence of philosophy's irrationality such as surrealism, existentialism, and absurdism, and nihilism. Moreover, the deconstruction was expressing precedent to move from the stage of modernism to postmodernism. Hence, the philosophy of postmodernism has adopted the questioning, undermining and nihilism, also relied on intertextuality, disorder, and non-compatibility, as well as revisit a lot of the central axioms and arguments started dating by Western thought, past and present. Consequently, it is destabilizing Postmodern, by David Carter, all the traditional notions of language and identity, as we hear a lot of foreign students who are studying English literature are accused of anything that they do not understand is expressed as postmodern. Often literary texts reveal what postmodern absence of narrow-mindedness, and focused its analysis on it. The care of all the criticism of texts and lack of clarity of identity, and what is known as the intertextuality is reformulating early work or correlation between literary texts. Carter, 2012. The postmodernism meant theories, currents of philosophical, intellectual, literary, monetary, and technical schools that have appeared after postmodern, structuralism, semiotics and linguistics. The postmodernism is, to undermine Western metaphysics, and the destruction of the central arguments that dominated ancient and modern Western thought, such as language, identity, origin, voice, and mind, so has used the mechanisms of dispersal, uncertainty, disagreement and westernization. Postmodernism appeared combined with the philosophy of anarchy, nihilism, disassembly, meaninglessness and disorder, therefore, it got some of its characteristic from those philosophies. Clearly, it has been shown that the ideas are relatively different between postmodernism concepts and former modernism. There are those who believe that the postmodernism is radically totally different on modernism ideas. Some of them believed it is possible to consider that the writers and artists in the pre-modern stage that they as the postmodernists, even though the concept was not formulated at the time. This is the closest to the controversy that sees Freud's theories of the unconscious that they are already present in the German Romantic thought. That modernism project was never finished yet, as this project continues to seek to achieve its objectives. In this, he is intended to enlighten values of the mind and social justice. Whatever the use, it is clear that the theory of interpretation of social and cultural developments through the metanarrative are no longer possible or acceptable, that it is no longer possible for ideas to be closely linked with historical reality. Everything is text and image, Carter, 2012, Habermas, 2015. The thinkers had been linked between. Thus, the new global conflicts have been associated with economic and political transformations of social and private cultural that characterize the new phase, which entered human after the fall of the Soviet Union. Among other things, this means transformation, abandoning traditional concepts and tools in the analysis of society and state relations, such as social class, ethnic and cultural conflict, or party representation and associative citizens within the state institutions and their access to civil rights, and relations with states regarding the foundations of dependency and control centers of power and their perimeters. Postmodernism associated with the historic and contextual reference, and the evolution of Western capitalism postmodern socially, economically, politically, and culturally. Also, it has been closely associated with the development of the media. Postmodernism as it came as a reaction to structural linguistics, Western and central statements that refer to the hegemony, domination, exploitation, and alienation. Also, postmodernism had been targeted to undermine Western philosophy, and the erosion of capitalist institutions that control the world, a monopoly on the means of production, and it has the scientific knowledge. Postmodernism has also worked on criticism of the logos and logic through questioning mechanisms, dispersion, and disassembly. Postmodernism has appeared firstly in the field of painting, architecture, and civil engineering, before moving to philosophy, literature, art, technology, and the rest of the humanities and knowledge. Postmodernism theory has invaded all the disciplines, such as literature, criticism, art, philosophy, ethics, education, sociology, anthropology, science and culture, economics, politics, and architecture. Carter, 2012. There is a reflection of the ideas of postmodernism on the daily life, all humanitarian and technical fields in the community frame, where a lot of the pioneers are connected postmodernism with current intellectual and philosophical shifts, among other changes in social, economic, political, cultural, and even psychological in different societies. The beginning was in Western societies, where the latter has refused elite control on all sources of power and influence. As well, a lot of social movements emerged calling for the end of ideologies and exit all standard measurement, the consolidation of individual affiliation and encourage consumer culture. And thus creating new sources of power in society, which has been described by many of the descriptions, so-called the society post-industrial by American Daniel Bilal, who is of the brightest brains of the neoconservatives, and its so-called information society or the consumer society by the American critic Frederick Jameson, Zeta, 2003. In general, the framework of postmodernism consists of four perspectives toward it. Philosophical perspective that believes postmodernism is an evidence of vacuum in the absence of modernity itself. The historical perspective that sees the postmodern turn away from the modernity movement, or of a rejection of some aspects. The political ideological perspective that sees the postmodern erosion of the illusions of Western ideology. The strategic perspective who believes that the approach to the texts of postmodernism does not comply with methodological standards, there is not a single reading, but an open and multiple reading. Al-Ruwaili, 2002. Politically, the concept of democracy is moving towards change as the democratic majority is no longer required as urgent because of the features of the postmodernism emphasis on the individual as a source of rights and duties, laws, and therefore everyone has the right to be represented in power that govern, also has the right to reject any representation in this power, and this is what made the postmodernism thinkers talking about the field of democracy and not about parliamentary democracy or a democratic majority. Since a decade ago, German writer wrote, "I cannot be beyond politics on the issue of postmodernist." M. Müller, 1979, years has shown that politics and postmodernism have become inseparable and cannot escape a Western culture based on a set of plug intellectual foundations, intellectual, artistic, aesthetic and moral. So it could be identified in the following principles and elements: criticism, comprehensive explanatory theories. Postmodernism has sought to destroy the moral and authority of the major intellectual formats, which usually take the form of ideologies. Dual criticism of the analysis in the humanities. In the Western project of modernism, there meet between the two components of self and subject, while postmodernism calls for the cancellation of self-modernism. A new vision to concepts of history, time, and place. Postmodern formed special new ideas about the history, time, and place, regarding history as an independent discipline, or as an entry point for many of the social sciences, humanities, and applied sciences. The postmodern aims to minimize the importance of history, and does not see his role as being only a witness to what is happening and to record the facts. But these stories are not true. The witness always testifies whoever is stronger. The truth is relative and not absolute. The ideas of postmodernism are characterized by denying everything that was prevalent on the modernism stage and considers that the pursuit of the ultimate truth is the largest human error committed in the course of scientific and practical goal, and the basic idea of postmodernism is that it's impossible to reach the truth. Rejected the idea of representation. Postmodernism rejects all representation operations in any form of representation. In the sense that there is a group of individuals representing the rest of the people in Parliament. Because of the differences in the political discourse of each party and the different meanings of terms between cultures and even among members of the same culture, hampering the process of representation. Berlin, 1992. 3 Pioneers of Postmodern Theory. As known, the postmodern has its pioneers, theoreticians, philosophers, and critics, that he is known for his critique of modern media and technology. Furthermore, Jean Baudrillard made a set of concepts such as the floating truth, hyperreality, interest in science fiction, and take care of the virtual world, and unreal. Baudrillard denied, as Jacques Derrida, the existence of a clear meaning, but he said the floating signifiers or absented meaning. And therefore, he rejected the distinction between appearances and the facts behind these appearances. Carter, 2012. For him, he finally broke down the differences between the signifier and the signified, and no longer signs refer to the implications of any reasonable meaning, where the real world is made up of floating concepts. Baudrillard explained these ideas in his work Simulacra and Simulation. Baudrillard, 1994. Also, Jean Baudrillard denied, as such, the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, the existence of the truth as long as it is closely linked with language, error, conjecture, exaggeration, metaphorical, imaginative rhetoric and the media. Thus, Baudrillard said that the concept of hyperreality, where something is real only when it moves within the media. Baudrillard's writings. The Illusion of the End 1992, Fatal Strategies 1983 became nihilism. The signs have become meaningless because of its frequency and different, which does not end with. It has led the extremist views to the famous phrase, which has attracted harsh criticism, that the 1991 Gulf War were not real, it was a media event. It's unreal, it was without the symptoms of war. Carter, 2012. The Pioneers of Postmodernism. Also the French intellectual Jean-François Lyotard, 1924–1998, who denies the truth, such as Nietzsche, especially in his book Postmodern Condition 1979, Lyotard, 1984. In this book, Lyotard argues that knowledge cannot claim to be offering truth in any absolute sense, it depends on the tricks of language that is always relevant to specific contexts. Here, we find that Lyotard owes beholden to Nietzsche and Ludwig Wittgenstein, where he claims that enlightenment targets in human liberation, and the spread of logic not only produces a kind of scientific arrogance. Jürgen Habermas has refused to accept this assessment of the fate of the goals of the Enlightenment, where it is believed they are still viable. Carter, 2012, Lyotard, 1984. Jacques Derrida also is one of the most important philosophers of postmodernism, where interested dismantle Western culture distraction and delay, and to undermine the central arguments criticism and anatomy, in order to expose the dominant Western institutions, exposing the white mythology based on domination and exploitation, colonialism and alienation and exclusion. Carter, 2012. Jacques Derrida has criticized Western metaphysics, that represents attendance in the language and voice signifier. Hence, he undermined by a series of prevailing concepts, such as identity, essence, and logos, tag, meaning, the phenomenon, the system, college, organic, substance, intelligence, sensitivity, realism, truth, and certainty, culture, nature, error. He undermined by a series of prevailing concepts, such as identity, essence, and logos, tag, meaning, the phenomenon, the system, college, organic, substance, intelligence, sensitivity, realism, truth, and certainty, culture, nature, error, and speech, etc. Michel Foucault also is one of the pioneers of postmodernism, and paid too much attention to the concept of discourse and power and strength, as he believed that the speeches are strongly associated institutions and scientific knowledge. In the sense that knowledge in an era of what constitutes a speech includes specific rules agreed upon by the community, it constitutes the real strength and power. In other words, all the strength and authority of society, and are expressed in the speech that power and knowledge, and this is illustrated by Foucault in his book The Discourse of Language. Foucault believes that there is a close relationship between knowledge and power, so that the discourse on the old human, discourse has become in the 19th century about human excellence. Foucault, affected by Nietzsche when observed over the thread of knowledge, power and authority of the society, and the fact. Power and authority. Foucault examines his book, Discipline and Punish Power System, as structured institutions and organizations, and a device for control and discipline and punishment, as well as the expression of a liberal society. Foucault was influenced by the Bentham's work, Arabin, 1991, Thompson, 2003. The Foucault in this book, that human, historically, set off from the control stage of the bodies to control the minds and behaviors. This means that the state based on the power of authority, discipline, and control individuals, the bodies, minds and behaviors. Hence, the prison, example, a model of liberal strength and power of the state authority and its prestige. This means that Foucault calls for human liberation from power, and freeing it from the institutional power of the state. 4. Postmodern critique. As any theory, the theory of postmodernism has pros and cons just like any other cultural phenomena and theories, and the rest of the curriculum of literary criticism. And therefore, we cannot talk about an imperfect in the humanities at all. The pros: postmodernism, its liberation movement aimed at freeing man from the world of illusions and myths, and freeing it from the domination of mythology. Philosophies of postmodernism are also working to undermine the central arguments of Western thought, and revisit the constants, and so by undermining, questioning, dispersion, audit and demolition. And the goal is to build new values. On the other hand, it fights the culture of elite status, cases, margin and popular culture, and then criticized Orientalist discourses which had had a colonial character by disassembly, criticism and analysis. As postmodernism believed in pluralism, diversity, multiple identities theory, and reconsideration of the context of the referral, the author and the recipient, and well-cared intertextuality, differences, chromatography, gender and ethnicity, and it succumbed to the chromatography, gender, and ethnicity, and it succumbed to the language of fragmentation, disintegration, and disorder. Also, it denounced to the concepts of repressive and authority of the power. However, the most significant cons of the postmodern is reliance on the idea of disruption and destruction and chaos. It does not offer a realistic alternative to human cultural and practical. It is hard to apply the perceptions of postmodernism because of its whimsicality and extremism. So, the postmodernism consumed its strategy to effect highlighting the unjust prejudices without having a moral or political or social position. It is noted that postmodern theory undermines itself, because of the character of the anarchist, nihilist and absurd. Postmodernism has attracted positive and negative criticism both. It could be seen as a positive force editor are destabilizing preconceived ideas about language and its relationship to the world, and undermine all the self-languages that refer to history and society. Also considers that the era of postmodernism leads own assumptions and overrides all the correlated interpretations. For many are ineffective and is not committed. Politically, Carter, 2012, thus, we find that the philosophy of postmodernism has positive and negative values, but what interested to the human being in the practical reality are the establishment and rooting, not dismantling and disruption, while striving to build meaningful, rather than indulging in virtual worlds absurd, nihilistic, and anarchic. In my opinion, simply put, postmodernism philosophy does not work on an affirmation of any absolute right or objective, especially in matters of religion and spiritualities. When the confrontation with right regard to the truth of Allah and religious practice. The point of view of the philosophy of postmodernism is the following statement: this may be true for you, but not for me. While such a response might be appropriate when discussing the type's favorite food or favorite forms of art, but that's such a serious thinking when applied to the truth because it confuses matters of opinion and matters right. I may be considered the risks of postmodernism philosophy as decline begins to reject the absolute right and then leads to the loss of the distinction between matters of religion and belief, and up to the philosophy of the diversity of religions, which says that there is no true religion or belief. Thus, there is no one may claim that his religion is right rather than other religions. The second interceptor is that postmodernism are considered God is no longer the source of truth, but in humans. As René Descartes says so, I think therefore I am.